Hi, welcome to Here to There, hosted by Carolyn Taketa, former attorney, current small groups pastor, and life coach. Through monthly conversations with pastors, authors, and guests, we hope to stir your thoughts and encourage you to move from where you are to where you want to be, in your personal life, in your leadership, or in your ministry.
Welcome back to Group Talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Carolyn Taketa. I'm your host and the Executive Director of Small Groups at Calvary Community Church in Westlake Village, California. Well, today I'm excited to continue our conversation with John Noto about the differences and the strengths and weaknesses between support groups and regular small groups. I know some of us oversee both like John does, and others, though, we may have our feet just in the small group world, but we've had to deal with people in high need and crisis and emotional distress in our small groups. And we've had to counsel them and train our leaders to identify the triggers. How do they know what part they should handle? At what point do you hand that off to someone with professional expertise? I mean, there's so many questions around this, and it wasn't enough for one conversation. So we're doing part two. So you get a bonus this month. And we're going to talk with John further. So let me give you a little just bio for John. He is the pastor turned therapist who serves as a community life pastor at one of Willow Creek Community Church's regional campuses in the Chicagoland area. And he's been doing that for 6 years, coordinating discipleship and pastoral care. So he's bringing his insights as a therapist to both ministries. And he's kind of unique in that role, which is so great to have him on this topic. Prior to serving at Willow, John was a clinical therapist in a variety of settings, including Christian private practice and community mental health. He also enjoys writing, so he writes for online publications for the Small Group Network, smallgroups.com, and careleader.org, along with his own website, theunwavering.com. So, John, thanks so much for extending your time with us and continuing our conversation.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So for those of you who might have missed the first one, I encourage you to go back, and perhaps you want to listen to that first. We talked a lot about the differences between support groups and regular bread and butter small groups and the strengths of each of those. And we talked about the goals, the purpose for the different groups, and how, I don't know, how did you put it, John, how the content may be different, but the actual method by which you move people along is the same. You said it so much more elegantly. What did you say?
I said you can look at content or process. The content, of course, is going to be different. The process by which we grow, should be the same. That's our Christian belief.
Right. And then you also noted that both, whether it's in care ministries or support groups, recovery groups, whatnot, as well as our regular discipleship type groups, that basically growth is growth, and they're both moving hopefully towards health, emotional, spiritual, and holistic, and movement towards Jesus and being more like him. So in the big picture, they're aiming towards the same thing, but it looks really different. So today, let's turn our attention to this thorny issue we have, because people are broken and hurt people, and hurt people are sitting in our small groups. We're going to have people in our groups that are going to go through crisis, whether it's divorce, it's a child issue with a child, whether it's grief, a cancer. I mean, there's so many heartaches in the world. And so sometimes that can absorb a lot of a group's time and energy. And it might even start feeling like a support group for the person, or it just gets really messy. So how do you counsel your leaders to handle those situations?
Yeah, I think this is the topic that's easy to talk about because it's something we all feel. It's a felt need. Any small group point person, myself included, feels this, and most small group leaders feel this. And if you're a small group leader for any period of time, you're going to experience this. So it's important to talk about. I think first we need to just take a half step back and kind of parse out, because there's two ways to approach this. One is when and how should small groups give genuine support? That means, when should a small group leader step in a support role? When should the small group act as the support for the individual? And how should they do that when motivations are healthy, and when there's opportunity for growth there? I think the flip side, how I've heard this question asked, is how should small group leaders handle needy people,
Somehow that just seems, we're all needy. So it's kind of like the old adage we used to use in small group world, the EGRs and the ECRs, the extra grace required, extra care required. I've always kind of bristled at that because I'm like, we all need extra care. We all need extra grace.
Yeah.
But I do understand there are some people whose baseline may require kind of just more need.
Yeah, we use the EGR concept too, and I always cringe at it as well. But, it reminds me of, I think it's Joseph Grenny who uses the language that we all need to be better at having important conversations with difficult people and having difficult conversations with important people. Wow. Usually our small group leaders, we're talking about having difficult conversations with important people. They're people they're comfortable with, and we're asking them to have vulnerable conversations. But there's this flip side where how do we have important conversations with people that are causing difficulties is maybe a better way of putting it within our ministry context. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to start with kind of the first part, the genuine support. And I think this is where I alluded to last time we spoke. I think there's a great opportunity in group life ministries for care to happen in appropriate and healthy ways. When I was in a small group way back when, probably one of the most influential times I had in a small group was when our small group leader, I was just a member at the time, this was early in my faith, kind of brought to the attention of the group that somebody in the group anonymously was on hard financial times and was in need, was going to the food pantry, and it asked if there was a way that we could support that person. And for me, that was shocking. That was, theoretically that people in need are all around us, but to know that like in my small group of like 10 or 12 people, somebody's in that level of need. And later the person was so overwhelmed by it, we kind of anonymously took money, you pass the hat and do it anonymously. They were so moved and felt prompted that they wanted to let the group know that it was them. I just remember that was like a turning point for that small group. There were no weird motivations involved. There was no kind of boundary issues that were happening there.
What's an example, John, of let me interrupt. Sorry. What's an example of a weird motivation? Or what's like a motivation that would cause you to be concerned? Yeah,
this is another fun one because it's all gray area, right? The way I coach people, either our coaches or somebody else dealing with this, is generally group life point people, pastoral care directors are pretty emotionally intelligent people. So I say, if somebody's being cared for in the group, I just ask the leader to tell me about how the group's caring for that person. And I feel like invariably, inside of 10 minutes, you're going to have a knot in your stomach, or you're going to feel really
scientific
good about it. Yeah, absolutely. There's a questionnaire you can fill out. No, we don't go that way. But generally, it's the word "should" is around there somewhere when things aren't good. I should help this person, or the group should feel bad for this person, or they might not voice it that way. But this is where we get kind of caught up in some of these mistaken beliefs. And if we're not doing it for the right reasons, and the right reasons would be out of servanthood, in Mark 10, it says, even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. We see Jesus washing the apostles' feet. If somebody is coming from that place, we're out of an overwhelming sense of humility. They just desire to help another person in the way that they can. That feels, when you're in a conversation with somebody, so different than I want to fix this person. You get a sense that they're going to be a project.
Right. Or it's going to make the group feel good about themselves to have done this in kind of a self-righteous sort of way. But as you said, a lot of times it's a mixed motive, right? Mm-hmm. So it's hard to see beneath the surface. Only God will really know the hard part. But I like that handle on asking, is it a should? The other thing I've run across is where maybe a few people in the group want to help and other people are uncomfortable with it, and then they just kind of want to force the group to do it all together. And I usually say, you know what, just those of you who feel led, do so. but you don't all have to do this. So, and maybe it's a positive thing they need to move towards caring in a more sacrificial way, but you lead by example rather than say, okay, now everybody sign up and watch, this person in the hospital, their kids for each day. And some people are like, no, I don't want to do that. And so freedom from guilt, I guess too, that's kind of the shoulds.
And I think too, another barometer to kind of check in with is mutuality. And this would be different with like a hospital visitation thing. But say there's a couple in your in a couple's small group, one of the couples is having a lot of problems, and everybody knows about it. Okay, so are we lending that couple extra support, knowing that in any season, any of us will need extra support?
Sure.
Or are they becoming the project? Is this group no longer about all of us growing, and this group is now about fixing this couple?
And how long do you go there, though? Like, okay, say a group, and this has happened so often, say a group is going through marital issues and they're getting divorced or separated or somewhere kind of in that journey. So it's going to absorb a lot of the group's time and prayer and support for a period of time. What's an appropriate period of time for a crisis?
So this is...
I just put you in yet another box.
No. That's great. It's actually a perfect segue to kind of the other angle from the question you had asked, and which it boils down to what do you do with needy people?
Right.
Or what are, the language I like to use is, what are our thresholds of every ministry has thresholds, whether they're defined or not, of how often somebody can take up space, take a conversation, take up energy of your leaders before the next level of interaction is going to happen. And so just some kind of benchmarks that we use is, I have my 3 categories of needy people. The first one is when somebody is benign but frustrating.
That's me.
If you don't know who that is in your group, it's you.
Yes, we have heard that. All right, so describe the benign but frustrating.
This is anybody who's been around any church long enough knows a handful of these people. These are, and this is where that term EGR, extra grace required, pops in. It's somebody where there's a dynamic, they take up too much space in the conversation. They might ask inappropriate questions. They're doing something that disrupts the balance and the flow of how things normally go, the status quo. And this is a real easy one for me on coaching leaders, because I forget who it is, so I'm going to misattribute a quote here. Somebody said, I think it was Henry Cloud, that growth will always be awkward. Whenever we are growing, it's uncomfortable. We're doing something we're going, it's uncharted territory, so we don't yet have the stabilizing muscles to kind of look comfortable in that. I bring that concept in because when I hear a small group leader tell me they have an awkward or an uncomfortable person in their group, part of me is happy to hear that. I'd love for the balance to get thrown off, because by and large, these people, if they're not disrupting the group, if they're just a little frustrating, then it's an opportunity for all of us to kind of like look inward and self-examine. And an opportunity to serve and to, grow in humility and all of these things that none of us likes doing. So that's category number 1. Somebody's benign, but they're frustrating. Okay. So when, these behaviors or dynamics, whatever you want to say, increase, then you have somebody who's difficult and distracting. Okay. They're not just kind of off. They are distracting the leadership, the vision, the mission of whatever ministry they're in, whether it's a small group or a kind of a care setting.
They tend to have their own agenda, I think. That kind of characterizes that cluster of people.
Yeah, and whether they have that agenda overtly, purposefully, or whether it's just kind of how they are, and it's a personality kind of challenge. Sure. And each of those has its own different challenges. But again, this is the hardest segment of people to coach your leaders with, because, what I've found in my ministry settings is that when there's a breakthrough with somebody who's difficult and distracting, it's a great breakthrough. Like, people grow from that.
Right.
We had somebody who was in kind of one of our entry-level discipleship classes that we have on Sunday mornings. It's for people who are new to the church. And it was one of these guys who his knowledge of the Bible was 10x what his social tact was, right?
It's a dangerous combination.
Yes, it always, and we all know these people. And so he is incredibly knowledgeable, could quote up and down, and he just didn't have a lot of tact around that. And after week one, we got multiple phone calls from other people in the group that he was condescending or, arrogant and kind of pushy with some things. And so, the situation, I had a conversation with him, and it was actually, it was a fantastic conversation. He was one of these people with just low personal awareness.
Yes.
And when I was very direct with him, because it was kind of a threat to the group, he appreciated it. He changed behaviors. Yeah. And not everything, right? Because there's more to the story. There's always more to the story, but it's one of those where then, okay, I've invited him into a coaching relationship and he was open to it. That's that magic combo.
Wow.
And things changed and he grew spiritually. The group leader was able to be part of that conversation. So like everybody wins. But for every one of those stories, I probably have 4 or 5 stories where, it became distracting enough or difficult enough. And we had that conversation. And it was not all tied up with a bow.
Yes. And so when you've had, I think we would agree that you have to have these one-on-one conversations with these people, and we encourage our leaders to do the same. And when it does not go well, there's just probably been a handful of times where I've actually asked the member to leave the group because they were at a level which maybe this is your third category where their actions were so divisive and they just were not in an emotionally healthy enough place to be part of the community.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So that's category number 3. It's somebody who's dangerous or divisive. And this is less of a gray area. I think we all know, depending how your church would handle the specific situation, we all know what needs to be done. Is that person needs to be removed from the context they're in, obviously with grace and with coaching with care, because ultimately we're doing it to benefit them as well as the group.
Right.
We get somebody who's in a group who absolutely needs to be in a support group and they're just kind of a mess. Having a biweekly Bible study, on the Acts of the Apostles, like that's not a bad thing,
right?
But it's not the thing that person needs. And so that, and then you get all the way up into somebody who's a danger to the ministry functioning or something like that. And it's kind of like, okay, that's pretty black and white. We know what to do in a situation like that.
Right. What about people with mental illness?
Mm-hmm.
Would you still use these 3 categories depending on their level of functionality? Or would you just kind of think, okay, if you have a diagnosable thing and you're off meds? We used to joke about this one group where every so often we'd have this issue come up because one member was on and off meds. So when she was on meds, it was fine because she could function fairly well. And she was actually a lovely person, but there were seasons where she just would be off meds and then the group would suffer as a result. And it just kind of hung in with her. But at some point I'm like, I don't know with mental illness where you would draw that line.
Yeah. Yeah, the beauty of these 3 categories is it is more a function of the outcome than the cause. And this is where it's a challenge to have a conversation with somebody because I can tell you you're being divisive and you can tell me that, oh, it's not my fault and this is why and this is why and this is why. Okay, that all might be true, but I need to be concerned about the flock, the overall flock. And if there's a concern for the overall flock, like it doesn't matter why it is. And that's why we need to heavily lean on grace and be flexible in these conversations because whether it's mental illness or a relational kind of situation or, even just a personality situation. If it's frustrating or it's distracting or it's divisive like that, those categories work for any reason why. It's just a matter of how we have the conversation.
And that would be true, John, right? Even if it's maybe a seasonal thing, like most people don't stay stuck necessarily if there's a crisis. The crisis happens and then they're just in need for a period of time, and then they tend to go back to baseline at some point once the crisis has passed. So if groups kind of hang with them, it seems like that does over time lend itself. And so we've said, when you're done processing this grief or process whatever, we're here for you, and allow them, just leave the door wide open for them to come back. I think that's helped them get the help they need and know that there's a community waiting for them and supporting them in the wings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a concept we talk a lot about with our leaders is leaving the 99 to go after the one. And so if somebody, I'll often coach leaders, not often because thankfully we don't have to do this that often. When somebody needs to leave a group and maybe does not want to leave a group, I'll encourage the leader to stay in contact with that person. Right. Just because they're not in, the official small group does not mean we can't have a relationship, does not mean we can't shepherd that person.
Sure.
It's just a matter of how it impacts the group as a whole. So that can be helpful to kind of soften the blow and keep the door open, like you said, to kind of play off your analogy. So
let's talk about small group leaders that really want to be therapists and just relish that role. There are some people that kind of are attracted to that role. Maybe that's what they're doing in real life, something in that counseling-ish sort of area, or some people are turned off by having a lot of needy people in their group and they feel overwhelmed by that. That's like the story I shared last time. But some people really like that. And we've had to caution small group leaders to say, you are not therapists. You're not a professional. This is not, part of your job description as a small group leader. So John, how do you kind of help small group leaders know where their boundary is with that, especially for those who actually have that empathetic, compassionate, pastoral-ish shepherding side? Like if that's one of their gifts, I think it's even harder for them to maintain a healthy boundary.
Yeah. I think now in our church we have more of like a free market small group setup where we will lean more into leaders' strengths. So we have small groups that are very focused on biblical study. They're more of a Bible study group, a traditional Bible study group. We do have leaders who are amazing shepherds and pastors in their own right. And so we kind of allow for that because God wires us differently. And, you walk into 8 different small groups and you experience 8 completely different cultures. And so this is why we put a lot of emphasis and try to coach leaders to use that small group covenant, or purpose statement or agreement, whatever language you want to put around it. Use that not just as a sheet of paper that everybody signs that you can fall back on when, Joe Schmo doesn't do what he should do, but to use it and to involve the whole group in it. We have an exercise we have them go through where they identify what are the values that you want to be top priority. Every group, every ministry, we all know this. If everything's important, nothing's important.
Sure.
And so we encourage our leaders, let's identify what are we doing well now if it's a reboot, and what do we want to be doing well in. And so we encourage leaders to put on paper what it is they want to go after, so that even if I'm wired up as a therapist and want to be doing therapy, that's probably not one of the identified values, not if you're in our small group ministry. And so if that's predominantly where we're talking and the space we're in, then it's time to reassess them. Likely I would tag them to be a leader in our care ministries.
Sure.
I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
But I think, it's development for group leaders in general. We start with kind of a covenant conversation, and I get to know people's history and what's drawing them to this. And I'm not going to turn somebody away who's interested in doing it because they want to provide care or they're in the professional field or something like that.
Right.
It's just something you want to compare it to the standard we set in the beginning.
Yeah, and I think setting those goals in place makes a lot of sense. I guess a situation that gets sticky is when the care needs to go on for a long time, and only some people in the group. Like the whole flock is not in for this enterprise, you know? And so then at some point, like what are, and maybe this is what we might need to, I know we need to wrap up soon, but if you can give us some pointers on, you know, what are triggers to look for when a typical small group leader, not one that's a counselor type, but just a typical small group leader, what are the triggers for them to say, hey, to their church leadership, to their small group pastor or their care pastor, I'm out of my depth here. This is beyond the level of the one another's in basic care and spiritual comfort for one another. Like what are some signs to look for?
Yeah, I think two main things. One, comparing the content and the process of the group of what we said would be the primary content and process of that agreement. So that's the number one is if I walked into your group and I took notes, you know, as just kind of an observer for a period of time, would I say that what's actually happening matches what you set out to do? Okay, so that's number one. And if for an extended period of time it's not, then we need to look at the covenant, or we need to change some dynamics. And that's where you enter into, you know, some sort of coaching or development and work towards that, depending on what it is. I think the flip side is the leader really needs to self-examine and take a kind of a searching inventory of what's making them uncomfortable lately. Because every small group leader should be at least a little uncomfortable.
If they're growing, yes.
Absolutely. And so if, you know, that those center around care, then any coach or any small group pastor you know, wants to be talking to leaders about where they're developing. And that's kind of where that question leads. So if development then turns into something that's dominating their focus and is detracting from where they want the group to go and where, you know, the group ultimately needs to go, that's when you might need to step in and increase kind of the intervention, so to speak. And we go back to then, okay, how is that this frustrating or is it disruptive? And I think, but by and large, I have found that small group leaders, this is a felt need for them, not like a hidden actual need. And so when they end up on a phone call for 3 hours with somebody, you know, and that happens once a week, they're going to let you know about it.
That's true. This is true.
Yeah, whether you want to or not. So, and that's just a great opportunity to step in to shepherd them at how do either they walk alongside this person, how do they lead the group well through that season, or how do they intervene to change the dynamics of the group so it's in a better place.
And all of those are such great opportunities for growth. As a leader, as a follower of Christ, I think. So if we do this area well and care for people in need better, I think the leaders so benefit from that, and our ministries and the church gets healthier as a result. So it kind of all trickles up or trickles down both ways. It's like all a win. Well, John, thank you so much for your time. Is there any final thought you'd like to share with our listeners? You mentioned my blog earlier, theunwavering.com, and that's kind of a play off of a passage from Hebrews chapter 10, and actually I have it right here, so I'd like to just read it to the listeners, because I've found that this has been something that's been encouraging to me for people in ministry, for, you know, whether they're paid or unpaid. And this is what it says: "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. For he who promised is faithful, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is a habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." Amen.
So, yeah, especially people in ministry, I think it'd be so easy to just do this siloed. And that's what I love about the small group network. It's about us getting together and spurring one another on and being unwavering.
Well, thank you for listening to Group Talk. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a positive rating on iTunes, which helps other small group ministry leaders find us. So thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Here to There, part of the Group Talk network of podcasts. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out smallgroupnetwork.com for more resources.